Alright everyone, there's a national conversation going on right now in which liberals, who correctly proclaimed that the US had a dual or multi-tiered legal system for some time, all of a sudden they don't think that that exists. Why? Literally Orange Man bad. The second that Donald Trump got indicted, all of a sudden decades and decades of screams from the left and from lay liberals like the NPR sweater wearers about how the justice system was fundamentally corrupt and broken. The poor got dogpiled, the rich got away with it. You know, the law is like a spider's web, the hornets go free and the flies are caught. Black people got differentially charged. Now, that doesn't tell the whole story, but there is a differential in certain inner city forces. Police commissioners in the inner cities often were corrupt. People took bribes, people did blackmail, officers would plant crack in some black dude's car. All of these things happen. They're very real. The liberals are fundamentally correct when they say that the justice system is not really a justice system in the United States. Legal enforcement's big sin is not even so much about the methodology. One police force might be relatively passive. Well, you might end up letting somebody go for a minor crime that goes on to commit serial murder. Another police force might be rather ham-handed, so they're like, well, you got 2 traffic fines, I'm going to punch you out. The big problem is differential enforcement. So, that ham-handed or that passive police force, often there's a differential with regards to certain groups or individuals with how justice is handled. So, you got small-town America. All you got's a local sheriff's office. And the sheriff is good friends with his next-door neighbor. And his next-door neighbor likes to cook a little bit of meth. There is a significant possibility that the sheriff, unless things are out in the open, the meth heads being too obvious, may overlook it. Hey, Bob, can you cover up the smell of your cooking? Because, you know, by the way, you're going to have to give me a little bit of that when you're done. The big guy gets his 10%. Maybe a little bit of a shakedown or something. This sort of thing happens. Meanwhile, the meth head down the street that the sheriff doesn't know, he's just going to get busted. Differential enforcement's a big problem. So, when I see people talking about the dual system of justice in the United States, look at Trump and then look at Hunter Biden. Well, no shit. People have been telling you about that for years. By the way, by and large, Republicans up until a few years ago were all gung-ho back the blue. There's nothing wrong with the legal system. If anything, we need more policing power to get drug dealers off the streets. And sounded like a bunch of fucking morons. Now it's the liberals doing that. The liberals are trying to steal the tough on crime issue back after they lost it in the wake of the tough on crime 94 bill, pioneered by none other than Joe Biden. And enforced in part by prosecutors like Kamala Harris. What a wonderful administration you've put together. 2 of the preeminent tough-on-crimers responsible between the 2 of them for hundreds of thousands of people being incarcerated for extensive periods for minor crimes. Yet, by the way, you should vote Democrat if you're BIPOC because that differential justice system no longer exists because Orange Man got indicted. All has been made well. As long as the police and the Fed boys worship at the altar of Orange Man evil, their sins are forgiven. It's almost like a church service at this point. Have you noticed that? You can get away with literally anything if you've got TDS. Look at the Bush family if you want the greatest example. Oh, I'm sorry that I started a war that killed 500,000 people and wrecked the U.S. economy, spent $3 trillion on credit just bombing people. Sorry about that. I'm sorry I ruined the entire post-Cold War geopolitical situation and slowly destroyed relations with Russia, leading in part to the problems we have now. Yes, by the way, part of that was indeed Bush's mistake, not just Obama and Biden. I'm sorry about that, but, you know, I'm not really sold on this Trump dude. Yay, huzzah, yells a crowd of brain-dead liberals as they parade through the streets carrying Bush on their shoulders as some sort of an American hero. Well, I was always so proud when he said mission accomplished. When we got Saddam Hussein, we really did a good job. It's inexplicable. People have so much cognitive dissonance and so much political partisanship at this point, they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. But the dual legal system has existed as long as the U.S. has existed. Even back in the fabled era of the dawn of the 19th century, so, you know, the pioneers are starting to move west and in covered wagons. I don't think that was quite the Oregon Trail era, but anyway. And they're planting their crops, and they're encountering strange new lands, an era of bravery and beaver trapping. Even back then there was differential enforcement with regards to the law, especially in settled areas, the eastern side of the country. If you went to the territories, you were less likely to get gunned down than if you were in New York City. Most people think of the Wild West as being wild for the purposes of a bunch of piratical outlaws, bandits, and shit like that. Well, basically, the only dude in town, and you're hoping he's not corrupt, they can restore it is the sheriff and a couple of drunken deputies. That's your legal system. And you'll just get shot in the saloon. You'll get shot walking down the boardwalk. You'll get shot on the outskirts of town. You get followed by some desperados. You get shot out in the hinterlands. Everywhere you get shot. Indians will shoot you. The white man will shoot you. The animals probably have the capability of shooting you too. Who knows? I mean, they were talking about the hoop snake and shit like that at the time, the settlers' stories. That's actually a myth. Did you know that out west things were more peaceable? For the most part, they were more peaceable. People got together in these little towns with a fully democratic function and usually had a had a council that would represent them that was democratically elected. They were outside of the normal state power of the eastern states, and yet somehow, other than the wild animals and of course injury and disease and stuff, it was more peaceful. People often moved out west. People of means moved out west to get away from the corruption and the stringencies of the inner cities and go and start companies and shit like that. Prospect for gold, prospect for copper, and you're going to have a lumber mill here. There's a million trees to cut. Stuff like that. Even then, though, in their court systems, you still had differential judgment. You still had a dual legal system. Mainly it was delineated by race. Of course, the individual from China who was working on the railroad legally speaking was not treated the same as someone whose granddaddy fought in the Revolutionary War at that time in the Wild West. There's going to be a big difference. But it was even less than today. You've got more duality within the legal system, or more of a tiered system today than you had yesterday. The liberals have always been right about this. I mean, I remember this being discussed in the 90s when I was a little kid. The only problem is they always based it on race. They never based it on the real privilege, whether you're inside, on the margins, or completely outside of the neoliberal, neoconservative orthodoxy. That's the only thing that matters. If you have political clout, it's because you're closer to the inside of that orthodoxy. By the way, Trump originally would have been an in-party member. He would have been a core member of that neolib, neocon incorporated back in the 90s. He was big in investing, big in business. He influenced politicians, was influenced by them. Money was traded. I'm sure he donated to many political campaigns throughout the years because people would solicit it. He's worth billions of dollars. He owns a shit ton of property. He's got a shit ton of money. He's got a very powerful name. His endorsement, even outside of politics, mattered for especially New York City races. And so they would solicit that. Then he was more on the margins because at first they thought he was joking about reform. So they didn't stand in his way in 2016 quite as much as they arguably could have because they're like, okay, but it's Donald. He's given over to promising big, and in the end he'll be a normal president. He'll be like George W. But then he broke a bunch of their toys, and they had to constantly obstruct him to get him back out of office. That's basically what happened. So yes, when Donald Trump has misdemeanors artificially upgraded to felonies, is brought in on spurious charges related to something that somebody who is arguably much more guilty of the same crime, namely Joe Biden or arguably Pence, had done, and they skate completely. And then you see a person who committed several recognized felonies getting a sweetheart plea deal. Yeah, that's the dual system in action, but it's not the first time this has occurred. It's just the most brazen single event of its kind in U.S. history. Again, you've thrown away 250 years of civic precedent again, for one reason and one reason only. Orange man bad. That's literally it. That's about all. Peace out.